please welcome to the stage the Honorable CEO of Council on Competitiveness, Deborah Wince-Smith.
Good morning. Welcome to the 2017 National Competitiveness Forum. I hope all of you that were with us last night had a lovely evening at the University Club for our annual dinner. I know we were all absolutely blown away by the fantastic talk that Mehmood gave on sustainability. Thank you again for that wonderful tour de force of the imperative for sustainability in our future. Allow me to recognize and thank our sponsors for their support and commitment to the Council's mission and work. I want to recognize Deere and Company and Lockheed Martin, our premier sponsors. I want to recognize our national sponsors, PepsiCo, Snap-on, Deloitte, our chairman sponsors, ASU, University of California, San Diego, as well as our benefactors and patrons, HNTB, Michigan State, University of Michigan, Verizon, Marquette University, and Whitecap Investment. Without your support, we could not do the forum, and we thank you very, very much for that. Well, we have a full day of very exciting talks, as well as the release of some of the critical annual policy work of the Council on Competitiveness, starting with our Clarion call for competitiveness that we will release shortly. And I want to really just frame that in a few overarching facts about the good and the bad of our economy right now. The good news, of course, is that GDP growth over the past 2 quarters has been very strong. While productivity was flat through most of the year, it's rebounded recently, and unemployment is low, in fact, the lowest level since 2000. We know that consumers and investors are optimistic, and inflation remains tame. We are seeing action on longtime council priorities, such as reducing the corporate tax rate and implementing a territorial tax system to repatriate the offshore earnings of American corporations, as well as a much more balanced, innovation-friendly commitment to regulatory reform. The Fed just recently raised its expectation for growth this year and next year on the economy, expecting us to be about 2.5%, not at the level that Jim Clifton says we need to be at 3.5, but nonetheless, that's great news. And of course, unemployment is expected to continue to drop, and we hope to see some gains in wages. But of course, we know in competitiveness that there's not a silver bullet and that this is an ecosystem, and there's still a myriad set of challenges facing the country as we face a continually increasing growing deficit and ensuring the stability of our middle class families and ensuring that the crown jewel of our higher education system does not have a unfortunate impact coming out of this new tax legislation. And very importantly, we want to work very hard as this U.S. investment in our R&D, particularly our basic research, continues to decline. At today's forum, we're going to really look at the issues that are vital to long-term competitiveness and prosperity. You will hear from our board on the overall state of our economy and our agenda as we release the Clarion call. We will hear from Jim Clifton of Gallup with a look into the future. We're very excited that we will hear from the CEO and chairman of Deloitte on the latest report of the Council's partnership with Deloitte on exponential technologies and advanced manufacturing. We will have a discussion with the director of National Science Foundation and 2 of our university presidents on the work coming out of our Exploring Innovation Frontiers initiative that has laid the groundwork for a new commission on innovation frontiers we will release later today. We know, of course, that energy and manufacturing are inextricably linked, and we will continue the work of our great steering committee to look again at deep dives of our economy and bring to the forefront the skills and challenges of educating our workforce as we discuss energy and manufacturing throughout the day. I think all of you are going to love our luncheon talk by Adam Pori, the author of Bodybuilders, about human augmentation, and that will be both substantive and very entertaining. And then this afternoon, we're going to have a series of mini TED Talks, really looking at some of the disruptive frontiers, from big data to automation to cyber attacks, from the future of medicine and Bitcoin and blockchain, and of course the rise of the robots and what that means for American workers. So I want to thank all of you for coming, for participating, supporting the Council on Competitiveness. I want to thank our tremendous leadership, our chairman, Sam Allen, the CEO and chairman of Deere, our vice chairman, Dr. Mehmood, the global vice chair of PepsiCo, our vice chair for universities, Dr. Michael Crow, as well as all the members of the executive committee, and of course the great staff of the Council on Competitiveness. And so with that, I would like to invite the board and the executive committee to come to the stage for the formal release of the Clarion Call for Competitiveness. Thank you.
I forgot. I better get up here. Welcome, everybody. I'm Larry Weber, and I'm going to moderate this panel this morning and welcome them all. I understood there was a introduction that I was not in charge of, but we will go away from that. I think I'm the second longest member of the council, and I have to tell you, in that almost 30 years that I've been here, the work on competitiveness probably could not be more important. The kind of challenges that we're facing in almost every aspect of our leadership on a global basis are being tried every day. So today we have obviously Deborah, we have Sam Allen, Mike Crow from the Arizona State University, and Mehmood from Pepsi. And I wanted to start with the first category of tax, since when I woke up this morning at the hotel, that seemed to be on the cover of the front of every newspaper, and also was in my smartphone. And maybe, Sam, I'll start with you. One of the biggest, at least, benefactors of what the tax reform is corporate tax going down to 21%. I guess the question is, one, how do you see that as, a CEO and chairman of one of our major corporations in the globe, and how is that going to help you? And second, how do you think it could hurt, maybe, in our competitiveness in any way? And will it actually create more jobs or more innovation and competitiveness in our country?
Well, that's
Yeah.
a $100 question right now. It's interesting. This week I've been out with our investors all over both coasts, that's one of the first questions everybody asks. And we start out by saying, well, the devil's in the details, however they end up writing it. It's not, maybe from our perspective, our tax rate today is roughly 34%. It's normally what we pay. About 55% of our earnings come from the U.S. So if the rate does go down to 21%, our effective tax rate will probably go to 26, 27% in total. People have a tendency to lose sight that most multinational companies, it's not going to go down to 21% because they have earnings coming from other parts of the world. But it certainly will, if what everybody is writing, if it ends up being something similar to that, the analysis we've done, first and foremost, for our customers and our dealers will be very, very, very positive. And that's even more important than it is for us, quite frankly. If they do well, then we'll do well as well. There's no doubt it will be stimulative. I've read all kinds of things from economists. Some people say it will add to GDP 15 to 25 basis points. Other people say 50 basis points plus. I'm in the camp that it will add 50 basis points plus to GDP, but it will be feathered in over probably, it won't happen the first year because there are some other provisions to it that in your first year are negative from a company standpoint. A company like ours, immediately if the tax rate goes down, you've got to go in and all your provisions for tax losses that you've had, you've got to restate those. They were at 37%, now you got to write them back down to 21%. So there are some other sides to this that will have an impact. But in my opinion, if this does go through, it will be very stimulative. It will be stimulative over a longer period of time. And yes, it will help with competitiveness. But I think the stimulative part to the economy is even more important than the competitiveness part, that it may help a company like ours.
Well, I tried to get through the 500 pages, but they just delivered it, yesterday to everyone. But one of the areas that doesn't look so promising, Mike, is higher education and the way that the tax reform seems to be looking at some of the restrictions and things that would appear. Thoughts from you and your colleagues on that?
Well, first, tax reform is positive. It needs to be constructive, and it needs to think about the entire productivity of the country. But at the same time, what's happened is that many members of Congress have become frustrated with universities for lots of different reasons, and so they're, in my view, eking out some punishments. No joke. I mean, the proposed, now apparently off the table, but the taxation of tuition benefits to graduate students, the taxation of certain endowments, which is still on the table, the change in the overall status of the universities themselves, basically viewing the universities as problematic, is all a sign of the fact that I think there's two things that are going on. One, there's concern about the responsiveness of the universities to the bigger advancement issues of the United States itself, and there's some that are concerned that we're not doing what we need to be doing. There's others that unfortunately are using tax policy to send signals about what they, basically their view of the culture wars that are going on. And so you take those two things together, and it's not well thought out tax design related to helping the universities to do what the country needs most, which is to contribute to the most fantastic human capital production that the world has ever seen, like I talked about last night, as well as knowledge capital enhancement and production. Universities, I think, need to start also rethinking the way that we're communicating what we're doing, projecting what we're doing, communicating to the general population about the impact of what the universities are all about and what we're working toward, or we're going to have this continuing ongoing argument where tax policy, student loan policy, regulatory policy, structural policy, governance policy are all going to be shaped by politicians, many of whom are unhappy. Right now, what we need is the business community and other communities to also speak out for what they think the universities should be doing. And the tax status of the universities being largely not taxed entities has been a critical success variable in them being able to achieve the levels of success that we've been able to achieve. If all of a sudden the universities become just another taxed entity, then that's a completely different kind of thing. And we're moving in that direction, and we need to be very careful about that.
Couldn't agree more. You know, last year the council did a long-term study on productivity. And Mehmood, I'd like to ask you to look at where we might be headed in the direction of productivity in the United States, because the council had seen a long-term decline. And where do you think that will end, and what are the sort of levers that we need to look at to get really productivity back moving in the right direction?
Look, as we talked last year and as we've written, productivity, as you say, has been declining to flat now since 2008, 2007, for several years. Excuse me. Now, there is some encouraging data, and that is the last quarter or so we're starting to see for the first time an increase in productivity. However, the question is that a blip, or is that going to be sustained? And the reality of it is that overall the trend, as you pointed out, has been very, very either depressed or negative.
What's Pepsi doing about their productivity?
Look, we're doing what all other large corporations, we're looking at the most efficient way of deploying our capital, the most efficient way of using our labor force. What isn't sort of generally discussed and as much as it should be is with productivity and automation and everything else that we're doing, it is improving the output of our industries, but we're not replacing those jobs with new jobs. And so I think more important for my mind, not just productivity, is what type of jobs, and I touched on this last night, are we going to create and invest behind and educate people in order to have a workforce that is engaged? And the biggest worry over the next decades to come is this mismatch between the jobs we're creating and the skill set of a workforce that's available. That gap is widening.
This is the central issue. So productivity in certain sectors is accelerating at the fastest rate ever. The actual people who are working, creating, developing, and so forth, and then there are people being displaced who are then unable to re-enter the workforce because the nature of their employment skills is insufficient to be engaged. And so this is a process that's actually accelerating. It's actually creating part of the political response to the universities themselves, because we haven't adjusted also to look at this problem on a different scale.
But if I can just build on that
Sure.
point, as an employer, people ask me, what keeps you up at night? I'll tell you what keeps me up at night. One of the hats I wear is the Chief Technology Officer. The average age of an American with a training in science and engineering and mathematics working in any industry in this country is now over the age of 50. So in the next decade, half of that workforce, of the entire country's workforce, is going to anticipate retiring. Whereas there's nowhere near enough students that are going to fill that pipeline, that are coming out of institutions like Mike's, that we're going to be able to hire. And so the time period it's taking to fill a position, actually, if I look back over my last 10 years at PepsiCo, it's getting longer and longer and longer. Productivity can't continue if we can't fill that workforce. And so we have not only a mismatch, but we also have a diminishing pipeline of talent. In particular, in fields that take a long time to train people in. You can't train a scientist or an engineer or a mathematician in any of these fields overnight. So somehow, this discussion that's going on has got to take into account, what are we going to invest behind institutions that I don't train scientists. I don't train engineers. I don't train mathematicians. The universities do. I actually pick them up from there and then apply their skills. We've got a mismatch, and somehow we're going to have to fill it. We used to fill it from outside the United States. That pipeline is drying for lots of reasons. What are we going to do?
let's carry that thread to a bit of a tangent, and I'll go to you, Deborah. The council has been about many things, but science and technology, disruption, computing have been topics of deep interest and obviously impact productivity, education, everything. We're also seeing, at least in my opinion, the recapitalization of the economy, where you've got 5 companies basically worth $4.5 trillion, Apple, Google, Facebook, and wondering, where is our leadership right now in science and technology, and where does it need to go? And we're seeing all these, words like artificial intelligence, machine learning, which, by the way, MIT had the AI lab started in 1981. So, but, maybe you could frame a little about that. And then the rest of the panel, Sam, I know you guys just bought quite a large AI company, and how you see that from a competitiveness point of view. And in general, science and technology education, productivity, and disruption as we move into the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Larry. Well, when the council was formed 30 years ago, the whole issues around U.S. technological leadership were one of the driving forces for the creation of this organization. And we have always made the case that our nation has to invest in the forefront of new knowledge creation and deploy the technologies of the future in our companies that can compete globally. So we have been very concerned, and this is reflected in the Clarion call, with this long-term decline in our federal investment in basic research and development as a percentage of GDP. It continues to decline. Other nations are surpassing us, Japan, Korea, others, as a percentage of GDP. Now, we still, as a country, perform about 1/3 of all global research, but China is on a track very soon to surpass us on that. So the investment matters, and the investment matters because through the National Science Foundation, through the Department of Energy, through the Department of Defense, our universities and our national labs and companies actually come together in these strategic partnerships. That's one of our real core advantages vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And others, continue to come and really want to understand how we can have that ecosystem that moves so quickly. Now, the companies you mentioned that are at the top of the S&P, they were enabled by huge investments since World War II in electronics, in the microprocessors, all the things that enabled the Facebooks and Googles and Amazons, to create the value that they have. Looking kind of to the future, which of course is what our group of chief technology officers do, we are really working hard at the council and in the country to really focus on how all these science and technology frontiers come together in multidisciplinary ways. And I think we'll hear when we release our report on exponential technologies that this is the greatest time in the world with, the digital, the biotech, the nanotech, and the cognitive revolutions all coming together and colliding. And I think these are really going to be the drivers of productivity and our standard of living. But back to our earlier conversation, we have to invest in the people. Without the people to drive this, we will be the ones who do a lot of the core initial research, but other countries in the world will capitalize on it and create the jobs and the wealth for their country. So this is a big challenge and a great opportunity for our country.
Sam, some thoughts?
Well, I guess I've been on the council long enough. I'm aligned with Deborah, but I put it in a couple different categories. First, I can tell you from our standpoint, next 5 to 10 years, next 5 years, some of the innovations that are going to come in are just phenomenal. And whether it be in artificial intelligence, augmented learning, whatever you want to call it, that whole area, digitization, there's going to be tremendous productivity improvements. I agree with everyone that the issue we have today, everybody has today, is attracting the human talent, and it's just going to get worse. But as a company, you'll find a way to attract the talent, to work on whatever it is you're working on that derives value for your company. Free market enterprise will allow that to happen. The one that you don't do is you don't fund the basic research. And that's the concerning part from my perspective. Companies will find a way to get the people they need to do what they're doing. But the basic research that creates the platform upon which all of us build our businesses on, that's where the funding needs to, again, be invested in so that the country itself can stay very, very competitive. And you know, if you had you only have so much water in a bucket, and if you had to say how you're going to divide the water up between companies and free market enterprise, universities, and basic research, I would be putting a lot of that water in the basic research category, whether it is at universities or whether it is in other areas like the labs, because that's the platform that lets all of us then grow upon it. And we'll find a way to get what we need, but we don't develop that platform. And that platform's got to keep getting better and better. And as this world now is changing, as Deborah's pointed out, with digitization and everything else, the platform that we've invested in the past is no longer the platform we need for the future. And that would be the area that I would really, really think we ought to try to really focus on. The Clarion call talks about that as well. But these are very, very exciting times. I've reinforced what others have said. And, from our standpoint, I can tell you, just as an example, we had autonomous vehicles 20 years ago, but they weren't cost effective. We will, inside of 5 years, we will have autonomous vehicles that are cost effective. And the critical enabler beyond the technology that, in terms of sensors, vision, et cetera, the big difference now is you will also have the AI capability that helps you with that vehicle determine that when you're going down a field, for us, for example, it learns that that's a gopher, I keep going. That's the farmer's dog, I stop. And that
Poor
that
gopher, the
ability-
poor gopher.
that difference is what
I heard gophers are an endangered species.
they will be more and more. So, but anyway, that type of change is coming, and it's coming very, very quickly.
Mehmood is a
Mike?
gopher, a Minnesota gopher. Right?
Absolutely.
So I think what I would add is that we're in this really weird moment of cognitive dissonance of some sorts. So unemployment for people with college degrees is under 3%. Even during the recession, it was never higher than 5%. We hear from industry leaders all over the country, produce more and better, more and better, more and better, faster, faster, faster. And then we deal with political leadership, and they say, listen, you people are just a bunch of commies over there at the universities, and so we're going to start cutting back your funding. We're going to beat you into the ground and somehow get you under control. And we're like, well, really, that's not true. and we're told by industry that we need more ideas, more people, better people, faster, more technologies, more options, more tools, and so forth. So there's this weird thing going on. So the universities are being battered from several directions with demands being made from them. And so it's creating tension in society that's very, very significant. The universities in the United States, the research universities in the United States, are unique institutions globally. I've traveled all over the world and looked at research universities everywhere. There are very few institutions that even meet the lower tier levels of activity of an American research university. So we have this high-performing entity which can do a lot more, but there's this dissonance going on. There's this intellectual rejection. We're hearing even from people in industry, well, we don't need so many college graduates. There's too much of an emphasis on this or that. And no, everyone doesn't need to go to college, but everyone does going forward. We know this, that of the net new jobs added in this economy going forward, 80% of them require beyond a high school diploma. 80%. There's not a general political consensus or policy level consensus of that reality. We've taken some steps at ASU. We had 8,000 engineering students in 2008. We have 21,000 engineering majors now. 4,000 online through some really fantastic online engineering degrees, first accredited undergraduate engineering degrees, and 17,000 students with us. Unbelievable diversity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 8,000 employers coming to help hire some of those people, science majors off the charts. And so it's not the case that there aren't kids from the United States that want to do these things or want to move in these areas. There are many, many, many. The universities have to change some of the things that they're doing, but we've got this bigger political discourse problem that somehow the universities are a marginal asset to the future of the country. They're not a marginal asset, they're a central asset. And that's no longer perceived to be the case. I think we've shifted a little bit, and we need to work our way into a new understanding of the universities. And then there's this embitterment that's going on. So I come from a white working class family that is, if you look at all my other relatives from wherever they are, they're mostly angry at the outcomes of their lives. Why are they angry? Well, they're not prepared to deal with the economy that they're confronting. So they're angry. And so the economy is shifting. They blame the universities to some extent for creating this new economy and for creating what they perceive to be elite individuals who are not a part of this core culture that they come from. And you've seen some of their political statements in the last few years. And so there's this churning. The universities need to figure out how to start communicating to everyone rather than to some, and to communicate to everyone in ways where they can see future economic opportunities for themselves by enhanced learning opportunities. So in our case, we've decided to sort of move forward and find ways to educate across the entire spectrum of our society, in addition to those kids that come and live with us for 4 or 5 or 6 years to have an enhanced learning experience.
Mehmood, I'd like your thoughts on this conversation, but also I'd like to add, Mike had said the responsibility of the university system about innovation, science, technology, engineering, learning. You know, what is the responsibility of corporations to innovation and to science and technology and learning? I know Pepsi spends a lot of money on, research, but I just want to add that to after you've addressed the general question.
I won't reiterate what's already been said, but as I alluded to, I have no doubt in my mind that the creation of knowledge within the academic institutions of this country, first is second to none, as long as we keep nurturing it. And I'd like to broaden that out, not just to the universities, but our national laboratory system, the entire ecosystem that the US has created since World War II, essentially, over the last 6-7 decades, is second to none. And while what's visible, as you said, is the Googles and the Facebooks, they are technically a byproduct of that engine. Okay? They're a commercial face of that engine. And so that leads to your second question, which in my mind, I've always, when I teach this, I go, look, there's invention and there's innovation. Okay? Innovation doesn't happen without invention, but invention isn't by default just innovation, right? It's the application. Innovation, in my mind, and relevant to your question, is the ability to solve society's and individuals' problems. And you leverage technology and you leverage inventions, often several inventions, to bring them together. And I think, in principle, what industry does well is the ability to configure and aggregate several disparate inventions and come up with a method to solve a solution, whether it's an autonomous vehicle or it's new way of processing food, new agriculture, new way of communicating, accessing information. Those are all innovations, but the core of them is the aggregation of those. And that's what industry's responsibility is. We can understand consumer insights, we look at consumer problems, and we say, how do we now bring these in the most efficient way possible? That's what industry does very well. And we optimize and we optimize and optimize until a new S-curve comes because somebody has created a completely new way of doing things, and the early adopters pick it up and say, forget this, this is the new way. The US has done that better than any other society on the planet. You know, there may be a bigger online market system in the world now than Amazon, but the internet was invented through this ecosystem. Others now layer on it until we redefine those rules. Again, my concern is exactly what Mike says. Do we have alignment between our policy strategy and the demands? And the last comment I'd say is we're actually living in a world where we're going to see democratization of technology. We are rapidly seeing this democratization happen, and what used to be the domain of the elite has now become, through this accessibility, everybody has access. Now, the good thing is everybody has access increasing to knowledge, to information, to this capability, to connectivity, right down to the poor farmer in Africa. Now, how do we connect all of this in a favorable manner so that we can actually now increase productivity? Coming back to this can be leveraged in a very positive way, but we have to create the matrix for it. That's the challenge. I think if we figure that out, business and entrepreneur will figure out how to work within that matrix.
I'd like to just have a quick tangent before I set up the lightning round, the final questions. But Deborah and Sam, I couldn't let our conversation go without a little comment about trade. And the current administration view, I can only say, looks like hyper-protectionism to me. That said, where does trade play in our competitiveness in the next few years?
Well, this is probably, from my perspective, this is probably the most disappointing part of what's going on right now in the administration. The problem we have is for so long, certain parts will talk about the disadvantages of free trade, and they will politicize it and use it from that standpoint. And then all of a sudden that same group will come back later and now say free trade is good. And a lot of people in the general public don't know what to believe as a result of that. The reality is free trade is great for this country. It's great for the globe. Yes, there are people that get dislocated as a result of that. And yes, we have to figure out ways to prop it up. But in terms of helping the globe prosper, there's nothing that can beat free trade in that respect. Where we're going right now, some people say rescinding NAFTA, that it's a negotiation, that it's not going to spiral out and cause protectionism. But the risk is there that it will. And you're seeing that now even in Europe. President Macron in France, all of a sudden now they're trying to set up barriers even within the EU to protect their slice of the pie. And when everybody does that, it brings this global economy down. It makes it less prosperous. It doesn't open it up also to bringing those up in other areas of the world. So this is an area where it's amazing to me that that we have people that believe that protectionism is going to help the globe. And as I've indicated, this is an area that I'm very, very personally very, very out of touch with the direction certain people are trying to take this, and somehow we've got to get the public educated again about the benefits that everyone has received as a result of global free trade, and how that has further turbocharged the global economy, which has been good for everybody. So I guess enough said. It's an alarming area right now, but we're living with it, and hopefully calmer heads will prevail in the long run.
Any thoughts to add, Deborah?
I would just add that, the success of American companies and enterprises in the global marketplace was core to the creation of the Council on Competitiveness. And we know, just one of the data points, 2/3 of all revenue produced by U.S. firms is outside the country. So these are our markets, these are our customers, and we have to be engaged, not just in selling what we make and produce, but also in a leadership role in terms of helping set the environment for trade and the impact it has on raising the standard of living of people around the world. Having said that, there's no question that in some of the multilateral trading agreements, as well as some of the bilateral, there are provisions that could be improved that would be in the benefit of all. For instance, intellectual property protection. I mean, that continues to be a huge issue. I serve on this commission on the theft of American intellectual property, and have shared this, that if China implemented their existing IP laws on the books, our economy would be about $1.4 trillion more. That's a huge, huge impact. But that doesn't mean we should turn our back on trade as we try to improve some of these things. And of course, another area that's very, very important is the whole, digitization of information. And I'm very concerned that in the EU, with their provisions on privacy now and data, how is that going to impact the technological frontiers we're talking about? So the bottom line is the U.S. has been a leader, a supporter, and really the evangelist for trade for many years, with a huge impact on our economy and standard of living. And we can't give that up. And it will be a very important part of our work going forward.
Thank you, Deborah. Mehmood and the rest of the panel, if you had to, you're forced to boil down to what you're most optimistic about right now in the country from a competitiveness point of view, and what you're most excited about that you see as a big risk, what comes right to mind?
Probably top of mind from an optimism point of view is, despite everything we've said, we have a tremendous, vibrant ecosystem of innovative startups. And the fact, I've seen changing in the last several years, is the traditional silo of private sector, startup and big, academia, and sort of the academic research world. Those barriers and sort of silos are starting to break down. So it's getting more and more seamless, and the partnerships, I know at PepsiCo, my team has signed about 50 partnerships in the last decade between these institutions that were traditionally over there versus us, and now they're merging. And so you're seeing this connectivity despite everything else. And I think that is going to be a great engine. And I'm already seeing, I happen to sit on the board of some of those startups, and just the pace at which things are moving, that's exciting. The speed and the number and the ideation and the connectivity between our institutions. I think what is scary is what I just said, which I said earlier, which is if we cannot continue to get the pipeline and nurture the investment it's going to take to generate this new ideation and keep that pipeline coming, we will lose the lead from it. And as we take the lead, and it's not bad that others should be playing. Absolutely, the more the barrier. But that doesn't mean to say we should concede our leadership position and forego all the investment we've done. That's the part I worry about.
Mike?
For me, I'm most optimistic about the millennials. I live in a community of 100,000 learners deeply immersed with us. Unbelievable energy, creativity, unbelievable desire for to have their lives have some sort of meaning. They're open-minded, they're adaptive, they're high speed. We draw energy from them. And for those of you that read these negative things in the media about millennials, these people must not live with them. We live with them. They live with us. 15,000 of them live actually on our campus with us. I'm most optimistic about what they represent, their desire for successful outcomes, their desire for a successful country. It's really quite overpowering, and it makes me worry a little bit less about the future than some of the common everyday rhetoric. The thing I worry the most about, I've been hearing more and more from elite folks on the technology side that we're going to build all these autonomous vehicles and we're going to build all these autonomous systems and all these people are going to be forced out of work. And what we need is a solution like universal income. Well, that's one of the stupidest things I have ever heard anyone ever talk about. What we need to basically assume that there'll be a group of people who will no longer be employable, and we're going to have to tax all of these technologies to be able to find money for them to be able to live off of. If we do that within 20 years or less, there'll be pitchforks and tar and feather at the doors of everyone that built these robots wanting to take them down. So why did you ruin our lives? Life is not about your job only. It's about your purpose. It's about what you're doing, your contribution. Every human being is going to need to have an opportunity. So we're going to have to move away from the idea of a universal income and move to the idea of a universal learner. And that's something that we haven't conceptualized yet. How are we going to have everyone be universally have access to learning throughout their life so that they can adjust to the new way that the economy and our society works?
I haven't decided if Alexa's making me more stupid or smarter yet. So.
The Alexas in my house and my office are really fun to talk to, though.
Yeah. I ordered paper towels for the first time and it worked. But anyway. Sam, what are you optimistic about and what are you not so optimistic about?
I guess I won't say universal income.
No. You can, it's still stupid.
Yes, it is. You know, I'll be a little more near-term on my thoughts on that. You know, as we look to 18 for the first time in a number of years, almost every country around the globe is forecasting positive GDP growth. And all of these things, if the globe, if you're seeing GDP growth everywhere, that creates a sense of optimism that fuels a number of these engines, and there is a rising tide for everyone. And so I'm very, you know, there is a chance here for the first time since probably the 08-09 crisis that you could get back to a level of optimism about economic growth throughout the world, which is good for everybody, good for all of us in the U.S., but everywhere. And that, and I get to travel a lot everywhere, and you're seeing it. And economies that have had negative GDP growth the last few years, it's amazing the change in public perception almost overnight when all of a sudden now you're forecasting that things are going to get better. So that's what I'm very, very optimistic about. And on the flip side of that, the biggest thing that could detract from that is some type of conflict. And that's and the risk of conflict today is higher than it's been in many, many years. And that would be and there doesn't appear to be the recognition that there should be of that risk is higher, and what do we do to mitigate that risk and bring it down again. So those are the two that I would say why I'm most optimistic and my biggest concern.
Deborah, maybe base yours a little less on your opinion and more on what the Clarion call presents.
Thank you. Well, the Clarion Call has given our country grades. I don't know if you've all had a chance to look at the grades. We don't have an A this year on anything. We have a number of D's.
ASU wouldn't allow us to graduate with those grades.
Right, we would all fail with these grades. But, you know, if you look
Correct.
under talent, we've got a D, and tax B, meaning something good's going to happen, we hope. Trade a C, technology a C, research a D, regulation a B, and infrastructure a D. So I think from the council's perspective, building on what everyone said, we have to do everything we can to keep this growth engine going, but at the same time, we have to work very hard across the spectrum of competitiveness. So talent at the top, I mean, one of the things we'll talk about later this morning that's come out of our work on exploring innovation frontiers is how do we bring the new demographics of our country into the innovation space. We are on the cusp of this world of abundance through all this capability, and yet a very large percentage of our nation is not participating. That's what worries me tremendously, and it's something we're going to put a lot of attention on at the council. And, you know, if we could get our tax and regulatory and these enabling conditions in a good place, then let's build on that so that we have a much more robust and inclusive standard of living for our citizens. And that's really what we're all about.
We've had last question. We've had an interesting year, speaking of grades. We've had an interesting year in everything. But one area that is close to me is media, and how the media has represented the things that are happening. And I wonder from our panel what grade you would give the media the last 12 months in covering what seems to be one of the most interesting moments in American history. Deborah?
Well, I would give them a D. And the reason is I think that not completely, but in most cases, the leaders of our media are not accepting, and Larry, you should comment on this, because you're a leader in media, that they are really in a disruptive state, and that, you know, the country's no longer accepting elites to tell them what they need to think and do, and that they really have to recognize that and sort of get with the program in the sense of not putting their personal views in to reporting the news.
Sam?
Whatever grade, it wouldn't be a great grade. But, you know, I'd put it in two categories. I don't know that it's an opportunity lost, maybe. It's not so much what they've done, it's what they could have done if they viewed it a little differently than they have viewed it. So, you know, whether it's a D or C, I don't know. But,
yeah.
but to me, there was an opportunity here, at least mainstream media, an opportunity that could have taken a higher ground and helped build instead of also being a part of the destruction. And so that part, they certainly missed their opportunity.
Mike?
So first, we operate a very large journalism school called the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. It's a massive enterprise, 1,500 students. And so I communicate my concerns about the unbelievably poor intellectual basis on which most broadcast journalism in particular is advancing at the moment. And like, what are we going to do about this? I mean, the notion of a fact, the notion of fair reporting, notion of reporting, you know, what's going on different sides of a really complex issue, the notion of educating the public and holding people responsible, the notion of not pursuing just how many people can I get to advertise my news show as I'm running it on a 24-hour news cycle to jack up my ratings and doing everything possible to jack up ratings. These are fundamental issues that we're facing in this era of technological enhancement and all kinds of other things that are going on. So we're at a moment where I'm giving a poor grade because the student, the industry isn't able to adjust and learn and keep track of their responsibility. So we're sort of lost at the moment. And so I'd probably give a warning to the student. You're falling below a C, you're moving into the D range. I'm going to give you an incomplete because you're not working hard enough. You need to go back and do some fundamental changes in the way you think, and then I'm going to read your paper again because it's not very good right now.
Mehmood?
For sake of time, I won't repeat. I agree with what we've said. One add. I think the media in general has actually contributed to the divisiveness of our society. It's not just the politicians. I can read on the same issue, different parts of our society are now receiving their information from very segregated parts of the media, and they're not crossing over. And that has got harder and harder. And so if you're a certain segment of society, by either faith, geography, whatever, there's a certain part of media you listen to, and they play to that. So what's happening as a consequence is what we said, is not only partial information, sometimes sort of inaccurate information, but extremely biased to the targeted audience they want. And that's now resulting in this channel is for this part of society, this channel is for this part of society, and we sort of recognize it now. And that's what worries me the worst, because it's sort of become accepted. Now, as I travel around the world on the same issue, I can be in Europe listening to the BBC, to a European channel, and then come to the US. You'd think I was hearing a different story. Even the facts don't add up. Surely, that isn't all by accident. That worries me.
I could talk about this topic all day. I'll only add that my optimism is this is going to force us to a period of validation. And there is a way that a lot of the mainstream journalism and news will be in a higher validated way. I encourage everyone to read the Clarion call, please. We don't put these out just for the fun of it. So everybody, please spend some time with it. And I want to thank our panel, Mehmood, Mike, Sam, and Deborah, for your great thoughts today. And everybody have a good day here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, to provide us with insights from Gallup Global Analytics into major trends that will shape the U.S. and global economies in 2018 and beyond, please welcome Mr. Jim Clifton, Chairman and CEO, Gallup.
Deborah, thank you for all that you do. You know, Sam, you mentioned something at dinner last night. I talked to my wife about, and it ties in, Larry, with the panel you were just doing. You know, it's so hard to find information you can trust. And you mentioned Michael, you mentioned Walter Cronkite. You wonder if trust in media died somewhere with Walter, or maybe somewhere all the way up. Tim Russert, maybe some died then too. But Larry, if you were to ask the American public what their grade would be of the media, it's an F. They give it the lowest trust they have since Gallup started measuring this decades ago. I'm just saying that because what a great organization where it's one place you can go, one of the few last places you can go. But you do this, I mean, if I read the New York Times, we all know about that. You read the Wall Street Journal, but now even the Financial Times, the Economist, every line I read, I go, now what kind of an angle are they trying to put on this? Earlier in my life, I never did that, but it's one of the reasons why my firm takes so much pride in being a part of this organization and all the data and having sort of a non-special interest, high integrity look and say, what's this doing? But thank you for all of that. I'm going to cover some material here that I haven't covered before, and I'm not real good at it. Now that's a hell of an opening, isn't it? There's been a question that comes up about why do we keep getting surprised with big changes in the world? Let's just do Arab Spring. How come nobody saw that coming? You know, I heard Jim Clapper say something, and I really admire, regardless of whatever problems everybody's had here in this town, I really admire him. I think he's a great American. But he referred to it as being kicked in the stomach when President Obama said to him, we spend $100 billion a year with intelligence and nobody could see the Arab Spring coming. We don't have any answers at all. But I want to propose something to you before I show you some slides, and then maybe we'll maybe you'll have some questions. What we do is we just keep working economic data. We work economic data over and over and over again. GDP is pretty much the single metric that we use for human development. So we say, hey, how are things going in Egypt? How are things going in Tunisia? How are things going in Bahrain? Well, let's look at GDP. We don't even use GDP per capita, we just use that one. Then we just work it over and over and over again, and that's why economics works, and economics is a real important metric to us until it doesn't. we started working on this 12 years ago. We said, well, what is it that we need to know? I did a lot of the initial stakeholder interviews myself. I went to, every time I was with some kind of a world leader, I would say to them, if you could ask the whole world one question, all 5 billion adults, so you could do your job better, you could make changes that would change the world, what would you ask them? And they were sort of the best leaders of the time. You know, they always came back with something very simple. They didn't have anything that would blow me out of my chair, but they'd say, I wish I knew what they wanted. I wish I knew what they wanted out of a life. And I also wish I knew how they were doing. Because economics doesn't give you any of those. We got a pretty good breakthrough. If you said, what do you want out of a life? 7 billion people, 5 billion adults, 3 billion of those people, if you said, what's the great global dream, said to us, I wish I had a good job. That's hardly even written down. But what is a good job? So if you said, I'm going to try to get Michael to the very highest level of thriving I possibly can, doesn't matter if he lives in Argentina or whatever, if you really want to go to work on something, let's say he's about 22 years old, 25 years old, somewhere in there, you go to work on developing him as an individual. Right now, we don't have metrics for that. You say, well, I don't know what to do to him. Well, here's what we found. It starts with him having a good job. And it's changing a little bit because when baby boomers were his age, we just wanted to have a family. But you see, it's an enormous sociological shift. Well, OECD says he just needs work. I love OECD. They're a client of ours. We have partnerships and everything else. But we'll even count if it's informal. So if he's selling flowers in traffic, we count him as employed. He's still suffering. If you want to have three categories, think of suffering, struggling, and thriving. What you want to do is you want to get him to thriving. There's one level above that, and that's having a full-time job. That's 30 hours a week with a paycheck for an organization. Boy, if you can get him there, if you can get 3 billion people there, it changes the world. There's a problem with that, though. Most of them are low-paying jobs. So now if you want to go up one more, this is kind of the new Maslow hierarchy, get him a job that gives him a living wage so he can actually have a family. Totally different. Say, is there anything above that, a living wage? Yeah, it's if he has a boss that cares about his development. So go to work on talking to him about what he can become. This sounds pretty soft, but I'll go to the next thing, and you just said it. It says, can we take him even higher? Yeah, you can take him one step higher as a 25-year-old, and that is talk to him about what his purpose is at his job or what his purpose is in his life, and then he's very different. Well, a good question would be, how many people in the world are at that level, thriving, where they're feeling really good, and how many are at suffering? Well, can't you tell that by GDP? Well, we're going to look. So we built consistent sampling frames across 160 countries, and we found some questions. And you try this yourself. On a 0 to 10, with 0 being the worst possible life you could have, and 10 being the best possible life you can have, where are you today? If you're a 7 or better, that tells you something. So if Sam is a 7 and I'm a 5, he's having a better life. But you can't quite tell yet who's thriving. Because if I say to Sam, where's your life going to be in 5 years? And he says it's going to be a 4, he's not thriving. See, I'm lower. It was actually Danny Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner, that figured this out. And so he was the one that helped put this piece in. I'm a 5. So you say, well, Jim's not doing very well. I'm so sorry. But then you say, Jim, where will you be in 5 years? And I say, I'm going to be at 10 because I've just graduated. I'm going to do this, and I got a degree from the journalism school at ASU. I'm going to kill it. Now I'm back to thriving. You got to be in a place where you can get a good look at a screen. People said, how could it be? Does this thing light up? That's what we use, you guys, right there. So here, we're going to deal with the first question. How come we couldn't see Brexit? Nobody could, here, I can see it right here, I guess. That's near perfect linear increase in GDP. But so that little lead up I did with thriving to suffering, that's the Brexit vote. Well, everything's fine. Now you can see why everybody in the whole world missed it. But the problem with that line is all it shows you is what people are making and spending. It's just the transactions of life. So all those stakeholders that made the remark, I'd like to know how they're feeling. What they'd like to do is they'd like to ask all 5 billion people, how you doing? How's your life going? Are you leading a life that's worth living? Does it have meaning or anything else? That's the thriving in England. You see the tell there? I think it's the biggest drop we've ever seen. Thriving in England right before Brexit dropped 15 points. It was absolutely seeable. I mean, just as clear as a storm coming across a prairie. What's the lesson for leaders? We're missing a piece of data. You don't either or those, but when you line up the transactions of life, you also got to ask, how are they doing? That's how we're doing. Let's try another one. There you go. Here's the Arab Spring coming. I'm sorry I'm not more familiar. Look at that. That's not blended. That's actually the GDP growth right there. So I know Tunisia's not coming up here, but this is how wrong we are as leaders. The World Economic Forum gave Tunisia a big award for being this perfectly managed, and their trend line is exactly this one. There's the uprising. Remember, it was started by that guy, the food cart vendor in Tunisia who set himself on fire. Remember, it wasn't death to America. It was, I just want to work. Remember, they took his cart away. Look at this one. Isn't that amazing? Look, we're thriving. They're down at 8%. But see, if you're trying to predict it, and you just watch the transactions of life, you can't see it because you can't see how well we're developing as humans, or the total cum of all of us as individuals. But if you ask them, what a tell. Let's see what this one is. Okay, here's Ukraine. There's the Maidan Revolution right there. Now their GDP is a little, you guys, this is unbelievable. And what you really watch for is it's not as much the location of the statistic, it's the direction and speed. That's why you got to watch out for statistics. You look at locations when you see a spot poll or some kind of a thing. You don't have any idea what you have until you can see the direction and speed of it. But so you can be a let's see, what's a Russian? They just expect to have kind of a worse life. Suffering's part of being a Russian. I thought that'd be funnier than it was. But in England or the United States, you're up here. What you're watching for is who's tanking. Here we go. Look at this one. We've got that slow climb. There's your GDP. There's the U.S. presidential election. God, how many times do you get asked, what happened? Don't you all do this all the time? Here's one answer. Well, that's odd. Well, there we go. The United States does pretty darn well. See where we are with thriving? That would be one, Larry, on the question of where do you have optimism. This country, we stay pretty pumped up here until we don't. Can you imagine? Let's just call it a 10-point drop. Can you imagine if something like GDP dropped 10 points? But see, we don't have an emphasis. We don't really have an emphasis on the emotional condition of a society. We don't have good math to it. Sometime, it won't be in my lifetime, sometime when Gallup puts these things out, people will go nuts when they see them, because hell, it means war's coming, or it means massive change is coming. Well, or in the case of the United States of America, one that virtually nobody, I got a couple of friends who go, I told you Trump would win, you know. I know, but it was based on nothing. I can't count it. You should be wrong for a good reason like I am. And now that's interesting. That was funnier than I wanted it to be. So you might ask, Sam, somebody's selling a lot of tractors and construction equipment. How are things going in China? Look at that. Okay. Okay. But one of the things you got to think about China, you know, who President Xi talks about world leadership, and he's got 80% of his population that's not doing real well. There's a hell of a long way to go. But imagine the kind of hope and optimism that we have as an American, and I'm not giving an American picture, but I'm just saying, think of the difference there from what's probably, I guess, our biggest competitor. There's a long way to go. Okay, oh, here we go. Here are the Russians, the Russia thing. So they're just really flat. I know what this is going to say. I get a kick out of this. What do you think that spike is? So these guys are going along. They don't have any pride in anything except their president. So he has the highest approval ratings in the world. They're like 80%. Yeah, who said that? Yeah. No? So, yes. He wins Michael wins a ride on the duck bus. We'll charge it to the council. But you know, there's other data on this, and also, you know, when a city wins a Super Bowl, it actually goes up. It makes a difference. Boy, look at that trend downward, though. You know, if you're going to start wondering about Russians don't often go into the streets in a meaningful way, but what a consistent trend down. Oh, anybody been to El Salvador in the last decade? I went there. It's awful. Yeah, it's awful. They got to pick you up in armored cars, and then you have two things in front of you with machine guns and all that. Watch this one. We put this in here because you can turn around awful societies. Now, you got to work on the right thing. If you were to redo Maslow's hierarchy, excuse me, the most important one is security. And so you have to be in a state of mind of safety. It's the most torturous of all is to be afraid. And that was what, we've taken a deep look into this. They're doing a really good job of locking the place down. America's helping them too. So you can, there's hope for virtually all countries. Things are a little rocky there. But notice the percent. I think it's about 9 or 10. I can't quite see it. But it's a very big drop for what's probably the second or third most advanced country in the world. Oh, this one, that's probably the most troubling of all. Something's really wrong in India. Down to about 2%. Yeah, the thriving is probably of everything we've found in the last few years. I'd say that's probably just a simple top line macro behavioral economics finding. That'd probably be the most serious one. Just an example of. Guys, that's about half my time. I'm just going to stop. Do you have any comments or questions? Jim?
Excellent presentation. It reveals a whole lot. I wanted to ask you a question about kind of manufacturing because cycle of innovation? Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So we're in this colossal super cycle of innovation right now, and we come to these meetings and we see it. It's incredibly exciting, and then I go back to my hotel room and I've got a Chinese TV or a Korean TV and everything else that's made somewhere else but the United States. And I was just wondering, in all your research and the things that you do, I'm still incredibly concerned that the U.S. is incredibly competitive in innovation, ideation, invention, but in manufacturing, especially in the things that count, like in what you would call maybe deep science manufacturing that leads to all the things we're talking about in AI and nanotechnology and so forth like that. I mean, for instance, where I am in Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas, we created a $100 million Nano Institute of Engineering. We've launched 5 companies, one of which is mine, and the other 4 have already moved to China, all 4. So I'm the only one left. And as
How long were they there?
They were there about 2-3 years, and they got snapped up and taken to China. And I see this everywhere I go, pretty much. If it's not China, Ukraine, Russia, whatever, we're constantly, we got Russia, China wanting to invest money and capital into us. Nothing in the U.S., in terms of government or anything like that. Not that we'd want to be a company that is a state-sponsored company, but it looks like in manufacturing, the U.S., what we talked about 2, 3, 4 years ago, it's actually getting worse in terms of, we're creating all the ideas. We have these incredible universities like Dr. Crow's that puts out incredible innovation and so forth. But on the practitioner side, whether it's, practitioner professors or whatever, or it's tech transfer, commercialization, or whether it's, being able to put it in the hands of entrepreneurs and capitalize it, okay? That the U.S. is just, when you look at what's happening in China right now, in terms of what's being built in manufacturing and in other countries, I'm really worried that the U.S. is losing and continuing to lose its edge, especially in deep science manufacturing, the manufacturing that counts, not the just ordinary everyday stuff where we're bending steel and putting out products with motors in them and stuff, but the deep science manufacturing that's going to make a difference, that's going to really create the next generation GDP. Do you have any concerns with that?
Well, I have a concern, Jim, that's a little deeper than that, and that is that millennials don't start companies at all. So you almost have to start there, because you get all the innovation, and I say the same thing over and over again, but innovation doesn't have any value on its own until a customer is standing next to it. And Americans aren't quite clear on that. But when we get the invention, and then you get an entrepreneur or a builder next to it, and you get some investors, that's kind of the moment of conception. Nothing's more important to America, in my opinion, than that moment. We've got to get those. And then you just try to hold the thing as long as you can. That's my theory. 2 to 3 years isn't very long, but if we can invent them and start them, and then maybe they go out to the rest of the world, and obviously, Sam, there's no other side to it than that free trade. Americans have to have free trade because we have to punch so far above our weight class. There's only 300 million of us. We have to kind of kick the world's whole you-know-what in trade, or we can't have all this great stuff and great universities and great everything that we have unless we do that. But I don't think we can ever give up. We got to start companies. Nanotech is a good idea. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with the non-combustion engine. There must be all kinds of things we can do in healthcare and space and everything else. But we got to get those first cycles. But the future might be that the cycles are getting shorter and shorter, and then we spin them off. But for us to invent more and start more companies is a pretty good future for us. That's one thing. I do want to say one other. If this was poker and we were playing China, you guys, the hand that they're holding compared to ours is horrible. You want these cards, not those. I don't know why you don't read much about it anymore, but that one boy decision that they made, man, is that thing coming in right now. And the problem with the one boy is you can't fix that. You can't go back. They even tried to bus girls in from Indonesia. Good luck with. You got to bus in 100 million of them. You can't even do that. They've totally destroyed their environment. Every single river, every single lake, everything. I mean, that's such a massive project. And the bubble, I don't know what to think about that. Who knows what I mean, we have our own growing debt and all that kind of thing. But the last one, this is just kind of my own opinion. the corruption in China is still so bad. But, and it's very difficult to build a great economy in the presence of that kind of corruption. Go ask Russia or go ask a lot of places. So, but we got to make sure that we have our premises right on what conception is to create a great economy. Then if we do, I'm pretty confident. And I don't think we should worry if they keep going over there. That could be our new business model. Larry, what were you going to say?
Sort of similar to Jim. I just wondered if you could do this kind of
Can you hold your question just for 1 second? She's going to come running because I think they can't hear back here.
Thank you. This is sort of off Jim, but the research you presented, could you do that by category? Could you then know if an industry is not thriving and at some point it's either going to be disrupted or disappear?
Not with that particular methodology. No, that would only be for society. I'd have to think about it. I'd have to think about it more, and we're down to 6 minutes. So I'm going to give you an I don't know, but I'll think about it. There's got to be some way. Sandy?
Jim, awesome data. And so obviously it shows global trends, right? It shows globally, the world is losing confidence either in themselves or in society at large.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Hugely dangerous for society as a whole. What are they looking for? I mean, what potentially are the common reasons for this drop in confidence and thriving, and what are the potential remedies to get our society out of this?
Okay. The most simple, what you're looking for is a statement that describes the most events. So I'm going to make a statement that describes it. It's kind of like somebody says, well, are you sure smoking kills you? Because I have a aunt that lived to 95 and she was a chain smoker. That's one, well, good luck with that theory. But I'm going to tell you what describes the most events. It's that if Sam and I are both we're both 20-year-olds in Cairo. Both of us are out of work. Start with that. Because we are not in good shape. And remember, especially in the Middle East, you know this stuff, but if we don't have work, we can't get married. You just can't. That's out. So that means you can't have a family. You also can't have sex. So you got all those kind of things. Everything's working against you. Your life is crashing. Young males get really bad ideas when they're out of work. It's better to have young males out of work than young females. So if you just want to run in and fix a country, it's better to run in and fix the young males, describing the most events. So what do? You say, well, are you two guys, are either one of you going to get a job? And he goes, yeah, I'm fine. So Sam says, I'm going to get a good job. I'm being trained. Michael's training me, and he's going to hire me, and I'm going to do this kind of thing. He's actually completely fixed, because you know what? You just found hope. He has hope. That's what fixes it. Because you say to Jim, what about you? Are you going to be able to get a job? Remember, I'm 20, totally screwed right now. But see, he's not, but we look the same. And of course, all of economics count us in the same thing, unemployed, but you can't see hope. And you say to Jim, what about you? Do you think? And I say, I think I never will. Because the question that you're really asking with that Kahneman thing I told you about is, do you think the best part, just ask yourself or your friends or anybody, say, do you think the best part of your life is ahead of you or behind you? That's the net of the question we asked twice and all of that. But so when when he's 20 years old and I say, what we're really asking is, do you think the best part of your life is in front of you or ahead of you? He just said ahead of him. So he's got hope and he's fine. But me at 20, I say, no, I'm never going to get hired. I got nothing. So at 20, I think the best part of my life is behind me, not ahead of me. You fix that, you can fix any society. Thank you very much.
please join us for coffee in the foyer. The program will resume promptly at 11 a.m.